Welcome, insiders. It is noon in New York, so we are happy to begin a new week of programming with you. We have a nice full week again, and we are very excited to start Monday off with the Naval Cemetery Landscape with Park Coordinator Danielle Knott, who is joining us from the park. So this is going to be a real treat. It's part of the Brooklyn Greenway Initiative, the space, which actually our founder, Michelle Young, is a board member of. And the Greenway Initiative is one of my favorite things in Brooklyn. As a Brooklynite who loves to bike and who loves to walk and who loves the waterfront, we get all those things in one spot there, and it's super, super cool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop my screen. Also, before we start, brooklyngreenway.org is up in the chat. I will put it again before we go at the end of the day. If you have any questions for Danielle, please put them in the chat. I will be monitoring, and I'm going to stop my share. Hello, Danielle. Danielle, we need to unmute you. There we go. Take it away, Danielle.
Okay, so it's a little noisy right now, and that's because I'm standing directly outside of the Naval Cemetery Landscape. I'm just going to sort of flip my screen for you all so you can see where we are. So the Naval Cemetery Landscape is located directly off of the Brooklyn Greenway here at the Navy Yard. Kind of a bustling area with the BQE and Williamsburg Street West next to us, but the entrance of the NCL is really this cool portal that takes you into a beautiful meadow, away from all of the noise, and into a pretty reflective and natural environment. And as I go through the tour, you'll kind of begin to hear those noises fade away from all of the background traffic and sirens and construction. This is a pretty small space. It's a little under 2 acres of seeded meadow, trees, and wildflowers. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of history about the origin of the NCL before we get started. So we're really fortunate to be able to be stewards to this land, considering it has a really, really rich history. This land has been under stewardship by different people for centuries. This was where the Lenape tribe cultivated and lived off of for, a long time before Dutch settlers arrived and really converted this land into the agricultural hub that sort of Brooklyn is known for. And so the Brooklyn Greenway Initiative and the restoration of this site really incorporated the storied agricultural, military, and geographical history into the design of the NCL. And I say NCL, that's just short for Naval Cemetery Landscape. You'll probably hear me say that a lot throughout the tour. And as we're walking, I'll kind of point out some things to note, but the Naval Cemetery Landscape was designed by Nelson Bird Woltz and Marvel Architects, and received consultation from Larry Wiener Landscape Associates in the planting of the native meadow. This site, a little bit more history about the land itself. So we are in the Brooklyn Navy Yard currently, and really on the outskirts of it. We're sort of surrounded completely by what used to be the Naval Hospital, the Brooklyn Naval Hospital. All of those buildings are currently under renovation by Steiner Studios. They own that property now, but we were fortunate enough to be able to restore this space into a publicly accessible node along the Greenway. And that was made possible through funding by the TKF Foundation, Nature Sacred. They work to restore spaces or build green spaces in stressed communities all throughout the country. And so the hospital itself is not active anymore, but was really a hub for a lot of medical inventions throughout the 19th century. And the Brooklyn Naval Hospital used this land as a cemetery for soldiers, enlisted men that either returned from sea deceased or spent time in the hospital and then passed away and were buried here. So the cemetery itself was active from 1834 until 1910, although records, archival maps do indicate that there were remains buried here as early as 1831. And in 1926, the bodies were exhumed and moved to Cypress Hill Cemetery. However, in the 1990s, a really in-depth archaeological survey was done by Dr. Joan Geismer. The story sort of goes that during the late 20th centuries, when this site was actually experiencing more of a recreational use, these were tennis courts and ball fields for the officers in the Navy. Someone may have kicked up something that they shouldn't have, maybe a bone or something, which led to the immediate closure of the space. In about 30 years later, this archaeological survey was conducted. And what the survey showed was that while over 2,000 bodies were recorded as having been buried here in the site, only about 1,000 were recorded as having been disinterred and relocated. So that means that through the comparison of those two records, about 1,000, anywhere from 500 to 1,000 remains are still here at the Naval Cemetery Landscape. So the site can never really be developed, and it really is sort of a beautiful interpretation of a memorial to be bringing in all of this life back to the space through the use of native plants and pollinator habitat. So after this archaeological survey was done in 2012, Brooklyn Greenway Initiative started to put out the call for designers to help them restore the space. They worked with the Brooklyn Navy Yard Development Corporation in order to work on making this an accessible memorial site. And that's when Nelson Birdwoltz came into the picture. This is the smallest project that Nelson Birdwoltz has ever worked on. They are responsible for the Hudson Yards here in New York City, but they also work on a lot of beautiful landscape, architectural landscape projects all over the country, all over the world, really. And so this is a really special place for a lot of the people on their staff that live in the city, that come here. And it was really given just as much thought as all of the really large scale projects were given. So Brooklyn Greenway Initiative worked with Nelson Birdwoltz and several other partners in order to basically clear out all of what you see here that's now meadow, which was mulberry trees and mugwort. Really just invasive species had taken over this lot after having been abandoned for about 40 years, nothing going on. But it was also really striking how nature had kind of taken over and kind of restored a little bit of balance to the space. And that was actually that was also incorporated into the initial design. The mulberry trees that had kind of formed a canopy really resembled the time in which this was used as a orchard for a lot of fruit trees. And so it was kind of a cool connection. And as we make our way over to the Sacred Grove, we'll talk a little bit more about that. But right now you're looking at the Memorial Meadow. And the Memorial Meadow is really the focal point of the entire space. This is, as I said, about 2 acres of over 50 native plants that have been brought in and are stewarded by the Naval Cemetery Landscape staff. They are all chosen for their ability to to provide resources for native and migratory pollinators, birds. You'll hear some birds behind me, and really bring life back into the space that has historically, been a place commemorating death. So the interpretation of the site by Nelson Birdwoltz was meant to create pollinator habitat while while memorializing those buried here. And you can also see that what we're standing on is a boardwalk. This boardwalk is really fluid, and it sits completely level above the ground, above the land of the Naval Cemetery Landscape. Even though it's uneven, the land itself, the boardwalk is planed so that it's a nice level walking path. And this is one of my favorite views in the whole space, because you can really see how the boardwalk cuts through the meadow and creates more of a stream like experience. This is an homage to the streams that actually came from Wallabout Bay before the Navy Yard really built up this area of Brooklyn to be a really industrial location. And the boardwalk itself is made from black locust trees, which are native to this region of the country. So again, a lot of thoughtful design went into to this space. The boardwalk allows us as visitors to come and experience all of this beautiful nature, while also respecting the hallowed ground, the people, the remains that are still present in this space. And in the height of the season, right now, things are just starting to really fill in and become super lush. This plant right here in front of me, sorry, figuring this out, is Joe Pye weed, and it has just started to bloom. This will get to be 10 feet tall in the kind of late July, early August part of the season, which means if you're like me, about 6 feet walking on the boardwalk, it's about eye level. And so the entire experience of being here is really an immersion into nature. It's kind of like if you remember being a kid running through like a wildflower meadow or garden or something like that, kind of just being completely immersed in the flowers. It's really that experience for everyone here at the NCL. And the plants themselves were originally planted in a linear pattern. So if you visit, you'll see that there are certain spaces that kind of have the same species clumped together. There's an example of that right here. This isn't in bloom quite yet, but this is all Monarda fastulosa, bee balm. And so when it comes into bloom, it'll just be a big patch of purple flowers. And there are several other plants that are sort of planted in this fashion, some mint, and the original design incorporated the symmetry that you find in cemeteries, from headstones being, very linear. And so they planted clumps of grasses and wildflowers, perennials, annuals in sort of linear, in a linear fashion. Like this is one clump here that's also not quite in bloom yet, in order to replicate that sense of symmetry that you get from being in a cemetery. And I've sort of made my way over to what is the Sacred Grove. A really big component of this space, one of the things that I think makes it feel super special, and a way for people to actually slow their heart rate down while they're experiencing the NCL, is that it's completely surrounded by some pretty mature trees. So the whole entire perimeter has a combination of mulberry trees, maple trees, some coniferous varieties, and some red cedars that were brought in. And this gives a nice sound barrier. So now that I'm kind of on the opposite end of the NCL from where we entered, and all the traffic, in the height of the summer when everything is really full and lush, you really can't hear too much noise from the adjacent BQE or surrounding traffic. It actually becomes sort of more of a waterfall, like that's what I tell people, because I've lived in New York City now for a while, and the traffic has become a nice lullaby. But in this area in particular, we planted quite a few number of cherry trees, black cherry trees, that will eventually turn this entire area into what we refer to as the Sacred Grove. So all of these trees were brought in as whips and have really grown in the past 5 years. And we'll eventually continue to fill out this entire area so that you have a whole section of the cemetery, the landscape rather, that is completely shaded out and provides a nice little secluded area for visitors. We had some nesting robins here this year, which was really exciting to see. I think there might still be a nest in this tree. You can see it. It kind of got destroyed in a storm, but that's the remnants of it. We had quite a few nesting robins. The trees in this in the NCL provide a lot of amazing habitat for migratory birds, native birds to this region. We had some northern cardinals nesting here this season as well. And from here, you can see across the meadow are these two posts. And those are remnants of when the space was a ball field. Those are the posts that the stadium lights were installed on. And in the design of the NCL, it was a decision to leave those because they act as perches for birds of prey that come and visit the site and have this entire meadow full of smaller birds, of small things like insects, or maybe like a mouse or two that are crawling in the meadow. They can come and perch up there on those posts for breakfast, lunch, and dinner and enjoy the buffet that the NCL provides for them. And there's actually a red-tailed hawk family that lives next door to us in the Steiner Studio property that visits us pretty regularly for resources. So at this point, I'm sort of in the sacred grove, and some of our beautiful woodland sunflowers have started to bloom. We've had a pretty dry season so far, and so usually at this point in the season, things are a little bit more colorful, but a lot of the varieties of plants that we have in the NCL are drought resistant. There's no irrigation here because the meadow ecology itself is actually pretty good at maintaining soil that is damp enough to keep the species alive during times of drought. So even though some things look a little sad, the last couple of days of rain have really helped some of our more delicate flowers survive. We have lots of milkweeds planted in the space. This is the common milkweed, being visited by a bumblebee right now. And the several different varieties of milkweed that we have planted here have given us the opportunity to become a certified monarch way station by Monarch Watch. So the plants that are in the NCL can basically provide for the entire monarch butterfly life cycle. We have monarchs that lay their eggs here, and then when those monarchs turn into caterpillars, they have plenty of food to then create a cocoon and chrysalis, and then emerge as a monarch butterfly and continue on their migration south into Mexico. So that was a really cool recognition that we received this year. And this bench that I'm now standing next to in the Sacred Grove is a really cool feature of the site. People are invited to come and sit at this bench, which is a feature that is is found in all of the Nature Sacred or TKF Foundation spaces. It is part of their ongoing research in understanding how important nature is in stressed communities, particularly in urban areas. And one of the ways that they have been able to collect data on the importance of nature is by having these journals available in all of the benches that allow visitors to write their thoughts and connect with each other. We get a lot of poetry in here, and just reflections on how important it was that people have come across the Naval Cemetery landscape, either just on their walk home from work or unexpectedly And so that's that journal in particular, once it's filled, will be sent off to Nature Sacred and kind of cataloged and part of their archive of data for understanding how important nature is in these urban areas. We're in a particularly park-starved part of Brooklyn, and so we get a lot of families coming into the NCL who really enjoy spending time here for a couple hours on the weekend. We also have people that are making their way along the Greenway, and this is sort of a speed bump. They happen upon it and are really pleasantly surprised. So those journals are a great way for us to capture all of those interactions. So I'm kind of making my way out of the sacred grove now, and it's not super easy to tell from here, but these cherry trees were sort of also planted in a linear fashion in order to resemble a cherry tree orchard. And they provide a lot of food for birds in the wintertime in particular, because they produce berries that the birds can feed on when there are no insects to be had. So I'm going to take you to another one of my favorite places here in the cemetery. That's kind of a playful feature of the space. The NCL is obviously a solemn, I wouldn't say park, but landscape, because it used to be a cemetery. But there are ways for people to interact with the nature that give people an opportunity to be a little bit more playful. So these stones that go into the sacred grove and actually into the main meadow as well. Offer visitors an opportunity to step a little bit deeper into the ecology and experience all of the flowers that are planted here and insects a little bit more closely. So by stepping on the stones, you're able to sort of completely immerse yourself in the meadow and get a really full picture of the NCL. And it's really fun to see people step out on these stones, stop and stare at a bumblebee for a couple minutes, or maybe do a little bit of meditation. I haven't really found anywhere else in the city that you can get this close to nature since I've been here. So it's always one of my favorite things to let people in on. And I'm gonna zoom in on one of the flowers here. So this is butterfly milkweed, and it's one of those drought tolerant species that I had mentioned. It's kind of one of the few things that's in bloom right now, and it's doing really well. Kind of pierces the meadow with this beautiful orange color. And because it's able to sort of thrive in these drought conditions, it's going to be a really good year for it. Hopefully set a lot of seed and continue to bloom for seasons to come. One of my favorite things about the space as a beekeeper has been learning about all of the native bee species that this space is home to. We provide, like I said, have over 50 different native species here of wildflowers, plants, including wildflowers. And that means that we are able to provide for a lot of different species of bees, in particular cavity nesting bees, bees that make their home inside the dried stems of dead flowers, ground nesting bees, and bumblebees. Several different species of bumblebees make their home here, in addition to having some honeybee colonies that are used for educational partnerships and honey cultivation. Several of these trees that you see here, these pin oak trees, we're experiencing a little bit of an, I would say, ecological stress last year. We had a little bit of a bacterial infection on this pin oak right here. And so one of the really amazing things about the landscape management of the space is that everything is done really thoughtfully in order to continue to cultivate a really open-ended ecology here. So instead of removing the entire tree, we had the arborist come in and basically create a snag, which is, the dead stump of a tree. This one is still producing some nice branches and foliage this year, which is fun. But instead of removing the entire tree, we're allowing the trunk of the tree to remain an important ecological aspect of the space. So we've had smaller birds of prey perch on it in the wintertime. Bees can actually nest in the trunk of the tree if they are cavity nesting bees that like to make their homes in wood, like mason bees. And then those the branches and things like that, as they break off, become twigs. Smaller like songbirds and such will be able to use them as nest material. So everything is done really thoughtfully in order to maintain that ecology here at the NCL. Here's another beautiful flowering plant currently. The size of the blooms on these individual species can determine what type of pollinator they attract. And so the diversity of flowers here is another reason why we're able to have so many different pollinators visit and make their home at the NCL. And I've kind of made my way around the space at this point. In the winter months, you're really able to see once all these trees are sort of have dropped all of their foliage, the surrounding Naval Hospital buildings. And these buildings themselves are currently being restored by Steiner Studios, but architecturally they're still very stunning. And if you're interested in learning more about the history of the Naval Hospital, the Building 92 in the Brooklyn Navy Yard offers a really comprehensive historical look into the history of the Naval Hospital. It's free and open to the public normally. I'm not sure if it's open right now, but it provides a nice backdrop in the winter months. Speaking of the winter, because this is a 4-season meadow, the Naval Cemetery is open all year round. We leave all of the stalks up of the dead or dying perennial and annual flowers and the grasses in order to give those cavity nesting bees an opportunity to overwinter and also create an architecturally or sort of visually interesting meadow all season long. So some of the species of plants that were introduced here were chosen specifically because they have really interesting seed heads in the winter months. An example of that is this plant here. This is Anise hyssop. It's a member of the mint family. It's got a really nice flavor, or excuse me, scent to it. But these flowers will get pretty long, and in the winter months, they sort of resemble just kind of like a cattail or something. And so for visitors in the winter, this space still offers a really beautiful natural retreat. And this is one of our more exciting blooms currently, the common milkweed and echinacea, which we have a lot of planted here as well. And then this is the entrance where it's starting to get a little bit noisier, but there's a good example over here of the linear plantings that I had mentioned and the little blue stem grasses. So from here you can kind of see this very linear section of grasses, and this is in one of those plantings that was meant to resemble or evoke the symmetry of the cemetery headstones. And that design aspect in particular was meant to evolve over time as certain species in the meadow dominate over each other, over one another, to kind of create more of a fluid and natural landscape. So it's kind of what you're seeing now in the main meadow, and there are just a couple of examples of the more linear plantings still. This juniper was also home to a nesting robin this season. We had 3 or 4, I can't remember, nestlings fledged from that tree, which is really fun to watch because it's right at the entrance, and so we were able to keep tabs on them. Named the mother robin Loretta, which was fun. And so that is really the entirety of the site from a visitor's perspective. One of my favorite things that people always do when they come up to the NCL is stop at the entrance and ask, is this it? And I always kind of chuckle at that because you can really spend all day here paying attention to all of the things that are planted, all of the different bee species, and really just enjoying the site as a relaxing environment and a meditative space. We're currently, I don't know if you can hear it from my phone speaker, but there's a mockingbird in one of the trees above us. And we're currently working with a woman from Washington Square Park, an ornithologist, who is going to be doing a year-long bird survey of the site. And we have had several birders visit who are really blown away by the amount of diversity that this small patch of bird habitat can accommodate. But a year-long survey is really going to allow us to get a grasp on the importance of having this sort of landscape in an urban setting with the amount of trees and open meadow space that this that the landscape is providing for birds. We've got, like I said, the red-tailed hawks. Last season, a couple kestrels visited and stopped for lunch throughout the season. And then we also have quite a few migrating songbirds in both the spring and summer months. Chimney swifts, swallows, blue jays, kind of everything that you would find in one of the more hot spots for birding, you can find here at the NCL. And we're really proud of the landscaping management practices that we've incorporated in order to allow different bird species to be able to make their home here. One of the management practices in particular that we introduced this season in order for pollinator habitat was we're doing an experiment over 3 years in order to test and see how effective it is to be doing all of our spring cutbacks by hand. So I'm going to try and get a nice little close-up. This grass right here was cut by hand, and you can see there's a cavity inside this grass that allows a cavity nesting bee to sort of lay an egg in and use throughout the winter. And so by cutting back all of these grasses by hand, we're increasing the amount of cavity nesting bee habitat we have at the space. And this is the first year that we're doing it, so it's going to take a couple years for us to be able to fully understand how effective it was, but we're constantly incorporating new practices like that for the management of the meadow in order to improve our pollinator habitat. And so in the summertime, usually, not this season, but our amphitheater here is used for most of our programming. So in seasons past, we've held sound baths. We work with sound artist named Alex Beckman, who does hour-long guided meditations for visitors. We've hosted yoga, weekly yoga, some bird watching walks in the fall and spring to catch the migratory birds. And this year we've actually pivoted a lot of those events to be virtual. So we're going to be releasing virtual guided meditations in the next month or so, as well as increased the amount of family programming that we offer. This season, we're inviting people to celebrate our designation as a monarch way station by offering coloring pages for families to take home, color in a monarch and a milkweed plant, and then tag us in their finished artwork in order to create a virtual monarch way station milkweed meadow. We are also currently working on a self-guided tour of the NCL. So a self-guided tour that visitors can pick up when they get here and take themselves on essentially the tour that I just gave you, with a little bit more history than you would normally just pick up on from being in the space and observing it. A little bit more background on the Naval Hospital and the cemetery itself and how that was incorporated into the design of the space. And we'll be releasing that within the next month or so. So we'll make sure to let everyone know when that's out as well. And we're also trying to actively increase the amount of citizen science offerings that we have here. So I've talked a lot about pollinators so far, and that's because this year we're participating in the Empire State Native Pollinator Survey. The Empire State Native Pollinator Survey is being conducted by the New York Natural Heritage Program, and it's working on getting basically a collection of every native pollinator that is found in New York State. And because we have so many here in the NCL, we're working with staff and visitors to upload observations of the pollinators that are found here to iNaturalist, which is a citizen scientist app that allows anyone to contribute data to. And the pollinator observations made here at the NCL will then be automatically included in the Empire State Native Pollinator Survey if they meet certain criteria. And so this bee in particular, small leafcutter bee, could become part of that Empire State Native Pollinator Survey and help to contribute to the larger picture of our state's pollinator diversity. And while we were hoping to do more in-person engagements around that this season, we're capitalizing on the technology that's available to us using iNaturalist and our camera phones in order to still catch a lot of that cool data. So we have really had an opportunity this season with the pandemic to continue to offer people, visitors, interaction with nature. When I came into the space, you saw that I had to open the gate to get into the NCL, and that is that's been a key feature in allowing us to remain open and safe for visitors and staff during the pandemic. We were closed for about 6 weeks, but we're able to reopen safely because by using the gate in order to control capacity and allow visitors to kind of remain physically distant from each other while still being able to enjoy the healing powers of nature. So a lot of the design aspects of the NCL have been really important in making the space available to people during these really stressful times. So we're really proud of the fact that we've been able to remain open during everything. And a lot of the people that are regulars here that come and visit, pretty much daily have been appreciative of this as well. And just wanted to check on time. Do we have any?
We're at 12:40.
Oh, 12:40.
Yeah. So this has been awesome and very, very, very thorough. I learned more about bees today than I thought I was going to.
Huh.
I love, and really, you're a beekeeper. I love it.
Yeah. Being a beekeeper here has been really, really amazing. I get to sort of beekeeping personally has been one way that I've been able to connect with nature living in New York City. If you are a beekeeper or if you're an observer of like phenology, that bees, the pollinator colony, the relationships that bees have with flowering things. You'll really pay attention to when things come into bloom and weather patterns and all of that, because if like we experience a drought like we're sort of in right now, there are certain pollinators, certain bees that will emerge only for a short amount of time, and they're sort of they've evolved to come out or start gathering resources and pollinating at the same time that their sort of like co-evolved plants have. And if the weather messes up the timing of those plants being in bloom, those pollinators will emerge and not really have anything to forage on. So it becomes really challenging when we have these changes in weather patterns as a beekeeper to stay on top of that. Fortunately, honeybees can forage on anything, so we don't worry about them too much, but a lot of our native species, like different smaller bumblebees, different like leafcutter bees and solitary bees have a really hard time dealing with those sort of changes. But bumblebees are also able to forage on anything. This one's got a lot of pollen right now from this milkweed. And so they're a little bit more adaptable. But yeah, I mean, bees and butterflies and the birds are all extremely important parts of the NCL as a natural space and as a memorial site. It's really impressive to see how much life can be observed here, and that's exactly what the design intention was for the restoration of the memorial site, because it was supposed to be bringing life back into a space that historically had been a place for or commemorating death. So it's working.
No, I love the dichotomy. I've been thinking that the whole time. It's sort of like, if I ever had to be in a cemetery after I die, I'd love to be in one that's being repurposed so beautifully, especially with all of the programming you were talking about with the mindfulness and nature sacred. We did have a question, which is an important question, which I'd like you to field. From Peter: what days is the NCL open to the public now and normally, if different, for the pandemic?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. So normally in the summer months, we are open Wednesday through Sunday, 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. And that remains the same this season. We were operating a little bit in a little bit more limited capacity earlier in the season, but now we've been able to stay open and keep everyone safe Wednesday through Sunday, 10 to 6. And that will stay, those will stay our hours up until it starts to get a little bit darker out earlier. So at least through September, if we're able to, TBD with the pandemic. So.
Great. Yeah, and I've already put a link to the Greenway's website, which you can find under the Greenway website. There is a separate page for the NCL. The website right now seems to be down, so I can't get to the specific page. But if you go, it's pretty easy. So I'm letting everybody know, and I'm going to put that link again before we go. Pete asks, how do people know that the journals are there? He loves the paths and the bench journals.
So like a lot of things about the NCL, people that are curious are rewarded by kind of spending time here. Yeah. We don't really advertise. Part of this magic of the space and part of the sanctuary element of it is by giving people the opportunity to unlearn what a park is and what a sort of open space in the city can be. This is something that has been basically taught to me by the landscape architect, Jeffrey Longhenry, who's the principal architect for Nelson Bird Woltz on this project. We don't have a lot of signage in the space. It's something that you'll sort of notice if you're paying attention when you get here. And that's very intentional because the nature is supposed to guide you and slow you down and make you stop and observe. So the journals aren't really advertised as being placed on the bench, but if you wander back into the sacred grove and, oh, I'm sorry, I'm getting broken into right now. I'm going to mute myself for one.
Take care of that.
Hi guys, we're closed.
park coordinator's job is never done.
Sorry.
Oh yeah, no problem.
Yeah, people love it here. And like I said, people are rewarded if they're curious. So I guess those people were a little extra curious. But the journals are common, are found in these benches in all of the nature sacred open spaces, sacred spaces. So if you go to their website and you want to explore sort of or take a tour of some of the other places that they've worked on restoring in the Northeast, you'll find the benches with the journals and all of them. They also on their website have take the time to create these bench stories, or they'll create excerpts from the journals of passages that you can sort of reflect on as well, like some of the poetry that people leave. We're going to be, we had to remove the journal for a little while to reduce the amount of people that were interacting with it, just to keep everyone safe. Right. But we have some mini journals that we'll be handing out this season for individuals to sort of take with them on the bench and reflect, and then, you know, have them be able to have them once they leave the NCL as well.
Cool.
So yeah, so people, when they come across the journal, are able to read other people's entries and then contribute to this really amazing sort of like archive of experiences that people have here.
That's great. And yes, I also, just so everybody knows in the chat, I did share the naturesacred.org site as well, so you could check in on what Danielle was telling us about. Cynthia asked, are your cherry trees native and when do you expect the monarchs? Two questions there.
Oh, so the cherry trees are native to this region. They're black cherry trees. And we've actually been having monarch butterflies in the space since April. I think it was really cool. I use iNaturalist to track all of the observations I make of butterflies and bees in this space, and so I was able to see the last year's entry for the first monarch sighting was on April 20th of 2019, I believe, and then this year's was April 21st of 2020. So they're pretty predictable in that sense. And I haven't been seeing as many this season as I have been in last season, but it's still, I would say, a little bit early for us. In July is when most of the monarchs are here migrating, or you know, second generations are emerging from their chrysalis. And I saw one earlier that I was hoping to maybe get on camera, but they do tend to be a little bit less active or out and about on really hot days. And it, like I said, it's been a little dry, so we're not seeing as many things in bloom this season, which means there's less nectar for a visiting monarch. So she might fly, or he might fly and continue to go find another place that has more resources, at least in these earlier months. So I think in July is when we'll start to see a little bit more monarch activity.
Cool. Pete asks, is the main reason for the boardwalk to prevent people from actually walking on the former cemetery soil?
Yes, the main reason for the boardwalk is to make the site accessible to visitors while also making sure the ground itself is respected. So because this is a cemetery, every design element and the construction of the space was done extremely thoughtfully to make sure that the ground was disturbed the least amount as possible. So during the construction of the boardwalk, actually, there was about 6 feet from where it was installed that was fenced off, and the construction crew wasn't allowed to veer past that, so that all of the ground that was disturbed was only really where the boardwalk would end up. And the construction of it, I think I'm gonna pop down really quickly, or maybe I can get it off the boardwalk, but you can see this is one of the pillars that the boardwalk sits on, and it's actually disturbing very little soil, because the pins that are, or those round pins, at the foot, the base of the pillar, those are spikes that are driven into the ground, and the actual pillar itself sits above ground. So there wasn't really any excavation done in order to build this boardwalk. It's pretty incredible, the engineering that went into make sure that the ground was disturbed as little as possible. And that means that we as NCL associates and stewards, the gardeners here, we're also disturbing the land as little as possible. We don't do any digging or any sort of like large removal of soil, excavation of soil in any of our management practices. And I guess the other main design of the boardwalk, design element of the boardwalk is the way that it curves through and cuts through the landscape in order to create that sort of stream-like quality. You'll also notice, this is something I only really noticed this year actually, but the way that the boardwalk is designed with the timber sort of like off of a normal 90-degree or 180-degree angle, it's not forcing you to walk straight, it's really forcing your gaze into the meadow with the linear quality of the slats in the boardwalk. So you don't really want to walk in a straight line here. It's really more about slowing down and having more of a fluid experience as you make your way through the space. And that's, again, has been really thoughtfully incorporated in the amphitheater as well. The seats themselves kind of appear just raised off of the boardwalk, and they mirror the boardwalk below and continue to force your gaze into the main part of the meadow. So again, really thoughtful design elements.
Yeah, really. Do we have any other questions for Danielle? Thank you, Danielle. You've gone above and beyond here. Thank you.
Of course.
What was the cost of the project?
Oh, interesting. I have not been involved with the project since its origins, and I'm not sure exactly what the cost of the project was. But Brooklyn Greenway Initiative worked with a lot of different organizations in order to build this space. Con Ed was the charter sponsor for the construction and long-term stewardship of the space. TKF Foundation and Nature Sacred also were principal supporters of the project. And this is like an example of what Brooklyn Greenway Initiative does on the larger scale, is brings together private, public, and local and national organizations and entities in order to realize its vision along the Greenway and here at the NCL. So technically this space is still owned by the Brooklyn Navy Yard, but Brooklyn Greenway Initiative was able to come in and secure funding in order to build it. So I'm not sure that the actual cost. That might be something I can answer in a later conversation, or it might be on our website. But if you're interested in learning more about this type of work, Nature Sacred was the main supporter in this project. So you can find more about their building of sacred spaces on their website.
Yeah, definitely. And just, just to throw in my own personal, again, I said I love the Greenway. And I remember when the Greenway started, I've been living in Brooklyn for almost 20 years now. I was so excited to see the mission of basically tying together and giving access to the entire waterfront. For those of you not native to New York or native to Brooklyn, the Greenway Initiative is absolutely incredible. It's giving bikers and people and pedestrians the access to the waterfront that in some areas of Brooklyn hasn't been available for hundreds of years. And the entirety of Brooklyn waterfront too. They're not just talking about a stretch. They have plans to do the entire waterfront. So again, you can find that on the website. It's really cool.
Yes, Brooklyn Greenway Initiative has worked, over the past, we just celebrated our 16th anniversary this year, and have about 20, have over 20 miles of the full vision complete, with I think 8 miles left to go. That's mostly connecting large sections that have been complete in order to make it a continuous route. And the work of the Brooklyn Greenway Initiative is not only to build a bike path, but it's to incorporate a lot of the environmental elements of waterfront access. So creating resiliency along the waterfront and using native species, and really thoughtful design has always been a core part of its mission too. So not just creating like a commuter route, but creating community connectors along the Greenway. And so this year, if you're interested in becoming more involved in Brooklyn Greenway Initiative, and if you're a biker or a runner, we are relaunching the Epic Bike Ride and our Brooklyn Waterfront Marathon. They've gone virtual, but we're still inviting people to participate them by doing the bike ride or run in more of a solitary way. So more information can be found about BGI and those programs on our website and ways that you can support the final stretch of building the Greenway.
Cool. We have one last question. Well, I mean, I think it's one last question, but Pete asked, you said minimal signage. Are there any signs in the space?
So inside of the space, there are no signs, no words really, except for our visitor information kiosk, which is usually adjacent to one of the NCL associates at the front. We're sort of positioned to be able to greet visitors as they come in and answer questions. Most of the time, the people that are visiting the space have never been here before, so they just have a lot of questions right off the bat. But we also like to offer people an we're hoping to offer people an opportunity with this self-guided tour to kind of limit their interaction with people. You know, something that you experience a lot in green spaces in the city is just being inundated with other people trying to enjoy the green space. And so by offering a self-guided tour that gives people a lot of information that they can sort of absorb on their own without interacting with us, is a way for them to experience the space in more of a relaxing and solitary way. We just were able to install new signage on the front of the landscape so that people that are biking by we have more visibility to people that are biking by or driving by. But again, that's still very minimal and thoughtful. So
cool. Well, Danielle, thank you. You've been getting rave reviews. Everybody is really happy to have discovered the space, to have you walk us through it. And we actually, Pete just said on his next trip to NYC, he can't wait to visit. So
yes.
So I think you've developed a lot of new fans today. So I thank you again. Remember, you can go to brooklyngreenwayinitiative.org to learn more about the NCL and the entire initiative itself. For insiders, we have lots of new programming that's been posted for the upcoming week and for next week. Tomorrow, we have the Seafaring Cats of Gotham with author Peggy Gavin. Then on Wednesday, we have a virtual talk of Central Park North Woods, which is going to be great. So that's part of our Central Park series going on during the pandemic. Thursday is the reschedule of Behind the Curtain with Ralph Lewis. Your links, for those of you who are signed up for the first one, still should be good, but I'm resending out the registration link anyway, just in case. And then next week, Mandy will be joining us for actually, no, that's the week after. Sorry. Next week, we have a virtual talk behind the scenes at the UN. John DeSanto comes back for the Rainbow Room. We are packed with events for July. So, and Michelle just put up a whole bunch of new ones. So go and check them out. Hopefully I will see you guys tomorrow with Peggy Gavin and the Seafaring Cats of Gotham. Thank you again, Danielle. Everybody have a wonderful day and stay safe. See you tomorrow, guys. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Danielle.